I'm delighted to be joined by Erin Baker for this episode of Electric Insights. Erin is an award-winning motoring journalist. You'll have seen her on TV, you'll have heard her on radio, and you'll have read her in print. She is here in the capacity as the Editorial Director of AutoTrader, a current role she holds. And I enjoyed on her LinkedIn that she notes she is the UK's most senior female motoring journalist. Now, this is solely to do with gravitas, I'm sure, Erin. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a journalist, so I'm going to have a certain amount of ego. But yeah, sadly, there are very few of us women motoring journalists out there, so it doesn't take very much to stand out from the crowd.
How about that? Well, I think we may well talk a little bit more on exactly those sorts of things, but certainly, yes, a very established and very senior female motoring journalist. Right. So the general topic we want to talk about today is something you've identified as the gender gap in the automotive space, and trying to redress the imbalance when it comes to women, and particularly, obviously, being at Pod Point, women and EVs. So first off, could you identify to us what is meant by the gender gap?
Well, I think in automotive, sadly, there are two different types of gender gaps where the gulf between men and women is significant and shouldn't be there. And the first is within the industry. So, we still don't have enough women in the automotive industry, full stop, whether that is working with car brands, whether it is working in automotive media, whether it is being an engineer, a salesperson, whether it's in retail. There aren't enough women. And if we are expecting women to fall in love with cars, to buy cars, to feel that buying a car is anything other than a distressed purchase, then we need to do something to narrow that gender gap that exists internally in the industry. We need to build that pipeline of women coming through all areas of automotive, and we need to ensure that retention is high so that women fill more senior leadership positions, board positions as well. So that's the one of the gender gaps. The other gender gap in automotive is the huge gulf that exists between the industry and the consumer. We know that there are plenty of female drivers out there. Women account for about 46% of license holders in the UK, according to DVLA data. And actually, crucially, that figure is rising at a faster rate than men motorists. So, more women are becoming motorists. More women, we know, have more disposable income than ever before. Women in general are more financially independent. More women want to express themselves through liberty, through empowerment, through things like activities like driving. And so where is all the communications, the marketing communications, the content, the advertising that is aimed at women, that attracts women, that women feel represents them? Where is the empathy between the industry and the consumer? So those are the two gender gaps.
Fantastic. And could we just zoom in a little bit in the world of electric? Because my understanding actually is that gender gap is in some ways more pronounced even in the electric vehicle space than it is in the conventional vehicle space.
Yeah, this is incredible to me. I've been a motoring journalist in the industry for 20 years. I thought I knew it pretty thoroughly, and I absorb data every day around female consumers and how they behave in market, not just in the vertical of motoring. So I had assumed that with the advent of electric and that possibility, that opportunity to throw out the traditional narrative around powertrains and chassis and oversteer and understeer and carburetors and all these very traditionally masculine jargon and words and phraseology, that women would naturally gravitate back towards cars because they would think, oh, well, hang on, this is now a product where the narrative is around sustainability, it's around recycling, it's around comfort and tech and interiors, and this idea of the car as the third space after office and home, all that stuff. But when you look at the data, actually the gender gap is widening around electric. Women consumers are even more disenfranchised and unaware of what that electric story is all about than men. And we see it in facts, statistics like, women are 3 times more likely than men to say they haven't heard about the 2030 ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars. When government incentives did exist, for electric cars, 2/3 of women didn't know about them. And it goes on, a crazy stat, women a quarter of women actually think that electric cars are more expensive to run than their petrol or diesel counterparts, whereas we know the reverse is true and actually is the reason why they make financial sense.
As we speak today, Erin, obviously that is somewhat under threat as the electricity prices rise, but certainly it's a major draw towards the electric vehicle. And I guess that's absolutely true. The other things, I think they're much more simple machines to drive. So I guess, the obsession with manual gearboxes, all those sorts of things, which we would think of as a conventionally masculine sort of hobby space, has gone. These are point and push, go, stop, reverse type machines. So they are much more straightforward in many ways. I still maintain I think they're very, very good fun to drive. But yeah, I totally agree. I would have thought this is opening up to be more accessible to more people than what has been traditionally a very sort of male hobbyist type of field. So it is disappointing to see that to some extent it's moving the other way in the electric vehicle space. So I want to ask you about your experiences yourself in the world of EV driving, because my understanding is that there are a few challenges at the moment. We do our very best at Pod Point to provide a good charging experience, for example, but I understand out there, particularly for women, there are some challenges. What have you found?
Well, first of all, I always actually, I'm a huge petrol head too. I have my race license, my motorbike license. I love a V10 and a manual gearbox and going around a circuit, making lots of noise. It's all fantastic fun. I also love electric cars because actually at the end of the day, I just love cars, and it's a very new experience. It's a very different experience. It's a lovely experience. Electric propulsion suits a great deal of cars. I mean, my goodness, a Rolls Royce or a Bentley with electric propulsion. Wow, there is a true luxury experience. And at this kind of more dynamic end of the range, the extremely fast 0 to 60, that initial acceleration off the line also makes them a lot of fun. So there's still a lot of fun to be had from driving an electric car. I also think, I have to say, I think car brands have done an absolutely brilliant job in pivoting so fast to government mandates about the year in which it will all be electric. They didn't ask for those deadlines, but they were mandated by successive European governments, and OEMs globally have done a really fantastic job in meeting those deadlines. Where I think it is most people's experience, where things start to fall apart, or can be perceived as starting to fall apart, is with range anxiety and the charging network and so on. Now, I've been driving electric cars for 5 years, and I have to say, this is going to sound like you guys have set me up for this. And anyone who's listening, I promise I'm speaking genuinely when I say I've got a Pod Point home charger, and I got it fitted way before I met any of you guys. Was approached by Pod Point to talk, and I love my Pod Point charger, and that's genuine. I promise, hand on heart, you can take it from me. No money has changed hands to say that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
and the reason that I love it, and I can say this hand on heart, is I'm sure it's a charging point is pretty much does the same as what most other home charging points do, but this, like everyone else, like all consumers out there, having that charging point fitted in my home was a learning curve for me, and a very sharp one. And I thought it was a massive headache. Oh, I've got to get my head around all this. What does it mean? As soon as I start investigating it, it's going to be a load of jargon. I'm not going to understand it. What do you mean I've got to have a data cable wired through? What the hell does that mean? Who does that? The whole thing, you think, oh, this is just a car. It's not even part of my daily routine. It's just, but Pod Point, you guys made it really simple. And I had a lovely guy come out and he fitted it. And actually, I wasn't there. So on his own smartphone, he took a little video of how to make it work and WhatsApped it to me before he left. I mean,
superb.
Genius. It's that kind of just thinking in layman's terms about the way the consumer needs to live with electric. And that's what everyone in the industry needs to do. So I've been charging my car at home on a lovely off-peak energy tariff through my domestic energy provider, which even with the sharp rise in energy prices will still make it exponentially cheaper than running a petrol or diesel car for me. And I can't see that ever changing. So never say never. It depends how high we get with energy prices, but not for the next few years, even with an 80% rise in prices. I think the public charging network is a different matter. I haven't had great experiences on that. I continue to have very frustrating experiences with charging points being out of order, or motorway services not signalling in advance? Do they have charging points at that service station?
Yeah.
Are they rapid ones? Are they slow ones? What are they? Are there any available? All that kind of real-time information. Also really simple things. If we forget the charging network for a moment, where's the signage? How come it signs me towards food and drink and fuel, but not the charging points? How come when I reach a charging point and there are two people, they're charging, there's another two people waiting. Why is there not a queuing system painted onto the ground so that we're not all fighting amongst ourselves to get to the charging point? These things, everyone kind of focuses on, we haven't got enough charging points and that's the big battle. Well, there's not a great deal a lot of us can do to affect that. A lot of it is in the hands of local authorities. But what we can do is say, well, hang on, what about some clearer signage? So let's all just think a bit more. I always say, can we just, as an industry, put ourselves in the minds of the consumer and what's actually needed?
Yeah, 100%. I saw recently you posted on LinkedIn about some challenges, particularly on en route charging in terms of motorway services, things like that. It's not an area that Pod Point is particularly involved with at this time, but it is something that obviously needs to develop quite a lot. There's a lot of it, not just ourselves, but our competitors looking to invest into that. But I do think some of the stuff you raise around just practicalities, for exactly as you said, queuing systems, etc., identifying where the chargers are, identifying the types of chargers, etc. That does lead me on somewhat to the next question, which is about, you mentioned about an empathy gap, an understanding gap, etc. So, for example, on that, it would be very helpful to you and me to indicate whether it's a 50 kilowatt charger at that site or a 175 kilowatt or a 350 kilowatt, whatever is available, etc. And we often hear that this kind of, is it jargon, but that nomenclature, as it were, is not very accessible for newcomers to the industry. What's your view there? And do you have other examples of that empathy gap and how we could try and improve that as an industry?
Yeah, that's when we look at the data around female consumers and we look at why women haven't engaged as much as men have with the concept of going electric, aren't as aware of the whole thing as men are, a lot of that comes down to the language and the jargon used. A lot of it also comes down to where that information is spread, where it's published. I don't see many OEMs, many charging network providers, many commentators, reaching out to speak to women in the verticals where they are. So, well-being, travel, food and drink, who is proactive going out with messaging? So that's one thing. And the second thing, as you point out, to come back to what you were saying, is the jargon. I think I'm bitterly disappointed with the industry insofar as we had an opportunity, a really golden opportunity with the advent of electric to shake up everything for the first time in over a century, since we made the transition from horse and cart to fossil fuels. And yet we've fallen into exactly the same traps. We've set about explaining this new technology and this new lifestyle and this new way of driving to consumers with exactly the same jargon that no one understands. So, who understands kilowatts? Who understands the difference between kilowatts and kilowatt hours? I live and breathe this stuff. This is what I do on a daily basis. And I have to keep reminding myself. In fact, I mucked up again in a LinkedIn post the other day. I put something about it costing 66 pence per kilowatt hour. And someone said, I think you might mean kilowatts. You go, oh God, yes, sorry.
That one was the other way around, actually.
Sorry, the other way. No, you see? Exactly that. I've just proved my own point with my own stupidity. Do you see what I mean? I'm constantly getting confused. I have to constantly remind myself, and I live and breathe this stuff. What hope does the consumer have if I'm still mucking it up? So that's BEV, battery electric vehicle. Really? Can we not just say electric? PHEV, plug-in hybrid. Hybrid. I don't think consumers think anything's a hybrid unless it's got a plug at the end of it. So maybe we can just ditch hybrid. And, if you've got no decent electric range, is it really what consumers consider to be a hybrid? All this stuff. It's the same as we were doing with litres of boot space and BHP and pound-foot of torque. This stuff has never resonated with most consumers. So, yes, we do need to find better signage. We do need to find simpler. It's not dumbing down. In fact, it's a reverse, because it takes a great deal of skill to understand kilowatts and kilowatt hours and then translate it into language that means something to people. Yeah. So we need absolutely all that stuff transformed, the language and the jargon, and throughout the industry. So from the product explanations through the retail experience, via the media and the marcons and the advertising, and actually when you arrive at a charging point and it's got the little thing on it saying CCS or type 2 or for the charging points, or it's got 120 kilowatts. Does that mean I can put 50 miles in half an hour or less? I don't know. And I was extraordinarily surprised. So you've really got me on one now. I'm going.
That's great.
I was extraordinarily surprised that, of course, you build your own little community of electric vehicle users, don't you? Because you all turn up at the charging point. You've got nothing else to do other than sit there and chat. And also you're begging each other to get off the charging point. So you enter into this kind of bartering process where, I was wandering up to this taxi driver and said, knocked on his window, excuse me, I'm so sorry to bother you. How much longer are you going? Because I can see you're at 39%. Are you going to 100%? Are you going to 80%? And I'm thinking, please, God, be going to 80%. If you're here to 100%, we're all in all sorts of trouble because the charging slows down so much. 80%. He said, well, I'm going to 80%. So I'm sitting there looking I need to. And so he got to 70% and went, do you know what? I've got enough. I'll go. You can go. And this kind of stuff goes on the whole time. But you're thinking, really, are we leaving it to the owners to try and persuade each other to get off the charging point? It's dreadful. But I do think there should be a sign. I was speaking to two other electric drivers there, and they owned their own electric cars, and they had no idea that the charging of their electric cars slowed down past 80%. So they were sitting there waiting to go to 100%. So we need signage up. We need signage up as well, saying, did you know, by the way, you cannot concurrently draw power from both of these sockets on this charger. Because the software isn't there. And actually, if you go to draw power off the second one, you'll stop the charging on the first one. And if that person's wandered off for lunch, they'll be in all sorts of trouble when they come back. There's so much real life, just simplified usage for consumers that I do feel everyone involved could be cracking on with.
Yeah, so I think you are, I hope, describing some of the challenges of the early adopter. I mean, I guess Pod Point's vision for this would be that there would be sufficient infrastructure so you don't have those sorts of constraints. But there is so much nuance in what you've just talked about. Dimming of charging rates when you've got, or dipping of charging rates when more people plug in and those sorts of things. The key metric of range per hour plugged in, or how much time it's going to take to get. These are things which start to make great sense, but you need a degree of understanding. If you're talking about range per hour to a petrol driver, it's totally alien, right? And it is very, very difficult to simplify these things. So, Erin, maybe we need to put all our copy past you before we put it on our website. Because if you go to our website, we've had a good go at writing guides, but there's a lot of nuance to convey in there. So we hear you from both sides. I think it is confusing for certainly someone entering the industry, but also it is, with so much nuance, quite hard to confer the sort of challenge, I think.
It is, but actually you raise an interesting point. Petrol and diesel drivers don't know how much range per hour out of their petrol or whatever. But the one common metric, and we're trying to do this at the moment in AutoTrader, and I think with the cost of living crisis and people budgeting, this is key. Everyone worries about range anxiety, or everyone thinks that consumers are going to worry about range anxiety. And so consumers have been told, you will worry about range anxiety. And increasingly, I don't think it is range anxiety, is it? When you look at the daily commute being average daily commute being 7 miles or something, and most people will be absolutely fine 99.9% of the time with home chargers and so on. But the crucial point is this cost issue, and with the rising cost of energy and so on. And what petrol and diesel drivers are all too painfully aware of right now is how much a tank costs them. So, we all know when we go to fill up now how much a tank's costing us. We also all know roughly how many miles we get out of our tank because we watch it. We watch that range go down, and we know what it is. So the equivalent thing is, okay, well, how much will it cost me to drive? If my petrol tank is good for 400 miles, how much is it going to cost me to drive 400 miles on my electric vehicle by charging it on my home charger? And that's a simple calculation that, okay, people's domestic energy tariffs differ. So you can't give you a really accurate pence down to the last penny cost, but we can average, and we can say, off peak, it's roughly averages out at 6 pence per kilowatt hour, whatever the metric, and so on. And so we can come up with these rough calculations, which is all motorists have ever had for fossil fuel cars anyway. Never be, it's always been rough calculations, and that's all the consumer's looking for. So I think we can tie ourselves up in too many knots in this industry around providing accurate consumer financial information when consumers are just looking for ballpark figures.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I think one of the challenges with the tank concept is the full tank concept is a real thing in petrol. Most people actually wang 20, 30 quid in every time they hit, and they run into the data. But we still understand that. Whereas going and getting an absolute full battery is such a rare event. So maybe the metric is cost per mile. Not sure, but I think your plea is very much heard. I think the simplicity is, we all strive for that, but it actually takes, as you say, a lot of skill, nuance, and intelligence to get that right. And I agree, maybe we're not absolutely nailing that at the moment. One of the things, coming back to the more general automotive point and the gender gap, etc., I think the balance here as well is quite tricky in terms of being encouraging and inviting for female drivers without being patronizing, right? So, I've already felt like I've when I was talking about, manual transmission and things like that earlier, maybe I'm being patronizing already. One, the author of Invisible Women talks about very serious aspects of this, where you have, the crash test dummies are all based on male physiques, right? Well, that's a very serious issue that needs addressing. But a very practical one, my wife raises to me is, where do I put my handbag? And that feels in many ways like a really patronizing thing to say towards women, but almost all women are carrying handbags, and that is not accounted for is actual insanity. It's such a fundamental thing, and it ends up in a footwell, or it's half in something, or jammed in a glove box, whatever. That balance, I think, between accounting for female tastes versus being quite patronizing, I think is a very, very tricky one.
Yes. And I think, unfortunately, that fear of patronising women, both female colleagues in brands and also female consumers, and therefore alienating them from the brand, that fear has stopped car brands to date from properly understanding if they need to market separately to women, and if so, how. And all that can be solved with data, right? Because you look at so it's about asking the question. Not enough brands have asked the question, what do women want? Do women want actually different things from men in cars? Do they actually talk use different language when they talk about their cars? Do they have different priorities? Do they have a different emotional connection with their cars? And so one of the strengths of AutoTrader, luckily, is that we have such huge figures on our marketplace. And so we amass a huge amount of data. And I have spent the past 2 or 3 years segmenting that data by gender to really get some results. And the results clearly show women do want different things from their cars. They have different priorities, not at the top line. All motorists roughly have the top, when they're in market for the next car. First thing is budget. Second thing might be reliability. Third thing is comfort, practicality, and space. Those things roughly remain the same. But then you start to delve down into the detail of what women want and the language they use and what language they respond to. And it starts to get very different. So, but to your point specifically about handbags, it's a good one, because Linda Jackson, former CEO of Citroën, took I think it was Citroën C5, I can't remember, took a model off the production line, stopped production, pre-production, when it was all going through pre-production, because she sat down in it and went, hang on a second, where's my handbag going to go? And the guys were like, well, I don't feel like I could have said that, but we're glad you did, because you're a woman, you can say that and we'll take it back. And there are practicalities that are simple practicalities. That other brands, there's one British luxury brand has been really good at doing things like, having grab handles that don't chip nail varnish, because actually their cars are 6-figure cars that are driven by female executives who don't have time to repeat their manicure 3 times throughout the day. And they don't want to turn up for their next meeting with chip nail varnish. It doesn't look professional. So that's really annoying if the grab handle chips their nail varnish. It's not patronizing, it's just practical. So it's about understanding your audience, and you only get that through the data and the insight. None of us, women included, can stick our finger in the air and say, I think women will find this patronizing. I think women will be genuinely interested in this. You have to go into market and ask female drivers and motorists what they want and really delve into it.
That's a really strong point. The answer is actually in the data. I guess the point on diversity, inclusion, and decision making is that having the thought to ask, right? To even perceive that. We've got a good example of this in charging infrastructure. We have a rollout of charging infrastructure in our public in our public network that's gone into supermarkets. And we've been called out on a couple of the sites where they're not well lit. And at night, it's not safe. And if we go back to the startup Pod Point was, which was a very male-dominated startup, we wouldn't have even thought to think of that, right? And as we become a more diverse organization, people are saying, why have we not thought of this? Why have we not thought of that? I guess what you then do is you need to explore the data and find out where the solutions might be from that.
You need to do both. Yeah, exactly. So, it's one thing to send out huge, great big surveys to female consumers and motorists and say, can we get your thoughts and your feedback on the following questions? But the flip side of the coin is you also need women in your industry. You also need women in your company to think, well, hang on a second, I think we need to think differently about this because I don't view that product or that communication in that way. And that's really important, and that goes back to building those pipelines, and as well as attracting more women into your organisation. It's retention is the other big thing there too.
Yeah, 100%. And of course, we can put pound value on this, right? So if we don't get this right and we're excluding our brands, our companies from that part of the market, that's a very significant part of the market. Your stats are very significant. It's the biggest growing part of new drivers, etc.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if we extrapolate the graphs as they currently stand and the rate as well of privately owned vehicles registered to women has grown by 17% in the last 10 years compared with just 10% of men. And so looking at all that, I would guesstimate that before 2030, women could well be the majority driver and the majority consumer and purchaser in the market, and we will have gone from being this stat I hate about women influence 87% of purchases to, well, hang on, women are buying 87% of the cars, so it's something that brands can no longer bury their heads in the sand about. And actually, if I could end on one point, it would be that I always say to brands when they say, well, no, of course we don't market separately to women. That would be sexist. I go, well, hang on a second. You market differently to 24-year-old in market than you do a 64-year-old in market, but you're not ageist. They are just two different demographics. And the same with men and women. It's not casting aspersions on your marketing model. It's just the reality of the market and the audience.
Yeah, I think that balance that we see, I guess society wrestling with that a bit as well, not patronising whilst also recognising differences. Something we're wrestling with in several areas. Erin, this has been absolutely fantastic. I'm going to end with some quick fire questions to get to know you a bit better. I'm very intrigued by the first one, a very predictable question. What is your favourite EV?
Oh my gosh. So we're allowed to mention brands here, are we?
Oh, yeah.
Fine. My favourite EV would be Skoda Enyaq, I think.
Fantastic.
Value for money. Amazing.
Yeah. Obviously, ID4 based car, isn't it? But I think their design is arguably smarter, with apologies to VW, who are great. It's a great car. Interesting one here. Favourite retro EV conversion?
Oh my goodness. What you mean, like that fantastic, like an Aston Martin where they've put an electric propulsion to it? That'd be absolutely wonderful. Like
exactly.
Like Prince Harry drove away from his wedding. Yeah, sign me up.
Oh, that was a Jag. That was an E-Type, wasn't it?
Oh, was that an E-Type? Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh well, there you go. That'll do.
Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah, we just saw a Land Rover Defender come out of a station I went by the other day, which is an electric conversion. I just think that must be terrifying if it's quick, all the angles bumping your elbows. Anyway, what is your EV or sustainability highlight of 2022?
Oh my goodness. Well, actually, my sustainability highlight was probably attending a talk at the Natural History Museum hosted by BMW Group on their decarbonisation programme. And we had this wonderful guy who was head professor of earth sciences or something, talking about, actually, did you know some like 60% of the world's energy usage is just spent on smashing up rock, i.e. mining for minerals, mining for all the rare earth elements we need. And, did you know that we should really be looking at mining lithium from Cornwall and all these crazy outside the box? And you go, wow, the possibilities are endless.
Good stuff. Great stuff. In which case, let's ask you for something related. The most random fact you have related to EVs or sustainability. Really put you on the spot with that.
There's a great thing where I think it's Bentley that's currently, because how luxury markets are going to get their heads around sustainable and recycled materials in a major way to replace leather and chrome and veneered woods is extraordinary. And it was either Bentley or McLaren. Let's put it this way. It was a British luxury brand, which is a good thing. He was talking about looking at fish skins and cactus skins as a replacement for leather. Love it.
That sounds really unpleasant as a cactus skin, but I'm sure they're going to nail it. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely brilliant. And then two-person ones. What song would you pick for your electric road trip?
Oh, I imagine Electric Avenue's been on this podcast about 50 million times, and I need to go something else. Or can I do that?
You can do that. That'd be no problem. You can have Electric Avenue.
I'm not the first though, right?
I can't remember at this point, but you may well be. This is Eddie Grant, isn't it? Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. And then finally, where would you go? Where would you go on your ultimate EV road trip?
Oh, I'd probably recreate one I did for Vogue a while ago, where I went through the fjords in Norway, because the whole road trip was entirely beautifully sustainable. We every time we had to get on a ferry to go between islands, it was an electric ferry. So the whole journey was just quiet and smooth and beautiful and serene. I loved it.
Superb. And you're charging almost exclusively off hydroelectric power, which is super sustainable. That is fantastic. Erin, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.